Hi everyone, welcome to Friday Fun. Today we're going to talk about spring flowers. And if you look around me, everything's blooming. And standing right here, it smells wonderful. We're going to look at a lot of flowers here today. There's these over here, the pink ones. These ones are called hummingbird sage. They have a nice long nectar tube so the hummingbird can stick their big long bill in there and longer tongue and drink up all the flower nectar. These have a lot of delicious nectar. So here's the lupin plant, and now I'm in front of it, and I want to show you some of the parts. So the flowers are purple, and when we look at flowers, why don't we go on a pollen hunt? Let's try to find the pollen. And this one has the little pollen things hiding inside. We're going to have to find some of them. There they are. Whoops. See if Miss Susan can get really nice and close. You can see all those little tiny specks of orange. That's the pollen. This is called a silverbush lupin, and the pollen hides inside the petal to protect it so it doesn't get washed off or blown away by the wind. After it gets pollinated by the bee, then it can start making seeds. And lupins make seed pods. They look like little beans. Let's open one up. I see 1, 2. I can feel them in there. Let's see. Oh, it doesn't open too easily. There's a seed. There's only 2. That's a small one. These seed pods won't stay green. They'll get bigger and the seeds will get bigger and then they'll turn brown and then the seed pod will open and shoot the seeds out. That's how this one makes seeds. First the flower and then the bee has to find that hidden pollen and then it gets pollinated as he touches other flowers and then the plant can grow seeds. The next flower we looked at was the hummingbird sage. And the hummingbird sage is this beautiful pink flower. And look at the pollen is right on the end. So when the hummingbird sticks his bill way in there, let me pretend to make a bill here. Oops. Sticks it way in there, then those pollens, see how they're touching my hand? They touch my hand, goes like on the back of the hummingbird's head. Can you see the little bits of dust on here? Then when he goes to the next one, he touches that one and that pollen touches another one. I have just pollinated that flower like a bee would. So we always got to try to find the pollen. And as we turn to this side, we have these beautiful yellow daisy looking things. They're in the sunflower family as you might have expected. And there's little pollen right on the top. Oh, this one's even better, Miss Susan. Let's back up. This one has a lot of pollen. If we look at it carefully, see all that orange pollen? That dust is right on the top. So the bee's body will brush against it. It'll get caught in all the bee's hairs. And then it'll go to the next flower and touch that one and then pollinate. So we're always looking for pollen when we're looking at flowers. So here's some Lilac Verbena. And you can see there's a little honeybee very much enjoying this flower. These are known for their nectar. These ones are special for bees and butterflies. And if you look carefully, they have a little tube too. Too small for a hummingbird, but if I take one out, you can see those little tubes. And the butterfly's mouth can go deep in those tubes like a straw and drink that delicious nectar. So that's what the bee is looking for also. The bee is trying to get that nectar. And when he's going for that nectar, he'll accidentally touch a little pollen on his skin and he'll be able to pollinate the other flowers so that they can make seeds. These are pretty, aren't they? And when we get to doing butterflies, maybe next week, maybe there'll be some butterflies on the Lilac Verbena so we can check those out. The next one I want to talk about is right behind Miss Susan, and it's called a Catalina Snapdragon. So here we are at the Catalina Snapdragon, and these ones are waiting to be pollinated. Look at that little pollen just waiting there on the edges. These must have just opened. This is sort of a white-yellow color, not that orange color. There's the pollen. Let me show you why they call it a snapdragon. A snapdragon flower actually snaps. Open, open, close, open, close. That's pretty funny, huh? That's pretty silly. And this is what they look like when they're just buds. They haven't opened up to the full flower. This one's starting to get closer to being a flower here. And then once they've been pollinated, then they kind of close up to this because they don't need to be pollinated anymore. And these will make their seeds. What else can we find? Let's go back a little further, and we have these beautiful purple flowers. Look at these. These are great. And these are different too. This is in the mallow family. And look at this beautiful flower. And all the places of the pollen are these little curlies. Let's see if I can get some sun. There you go. See that little white pollen underneath? And those little curlies on top. That's fun. Let me see if I can get some pollen on my finger. No, it's not too dusty. But there's some there. And maybe the pollinator has already visited. This one is in the mallow family. So the next one we can look at is the bush sunflower. And it'll be similar to the yellow one we just looked at, but it's a little bit different plant, and the pollen is a little bit oranger. This one has a lot of pollen showing. It's orange, and I get little orange specks onto my hand when the pollen rubs on there. Let's go look at some honeybees and see their pollen pouches in the back, and they'll be filled with orange pollen. Look at those back legs. Look at those pollen pouches are filled with orange pollen. She is going to carry that back to the hive, and they're going to use it to make wax for their hive and to feed their babies. So this one, we call it a Baja Fairy duster. And like you can dust your furniture with it or something like that. But the pollen on this one are right at the tips of each of those red little hairs. The bee or the hummingbird comes to get the nectar, which is deep inside. It will get that pollen on its body and transfer it to the next one. And now I've pollinated these two flowers. And as we look down below, we have these beautiful mallows. And this one, if you look carefully, you can see there's a lot of pollen in there. So here's a big bush with tiny flowers, tiny yellow flowers. It's called a barberry. And these little yellow flowers are so pretty, but you have to look so carefully to find them. There's a little flower bud right next to the little flower. And inside that little flower is some pollen. And then after the flower gets pollinated, it makes these little fruits. And these little fruits will have seeds inside. Having the seeds made from the flowers is one of the most important things a plant can do. So here we have some coastal dune, like sand dune, coastal dune poppies. They're the same family like our state flower, the California poppy. They're just a little bit different because they're yellow on the edges and orange in the middle instead of orange all the way through. And way down in the bottom, you can see where the pollen will be, down in here. All the little stamens are down here where the pollen's going to be. Poppies are different because poppies don't make any nectar. There's nothing sweet inside, just pollen. But their pollen is so good to the bees. The bees love these. So they get pollinated no problem. And then after the poppy gets pollinated, it makes a seed pod. And the seed pods on this poppy are very long. This one's not ready yet. It's going to get maybe twice that fat and longer and turn brown. And then it's going to pop. And the seeds will go shooting out from the poppy. These are so pretty. In the preserve, we have a lot of these, and we'll check them out when we go over there. And then this beautiful bush, while it's blooming, this one's called a flannel bush. And the flowers are really, really big. And when you look at them in the sunlight, not only can you find the pollen, but you can actually see the nectar. Let's come in. So if we look carefully, we can see the little bits of pollen on here. And look at that shininess in the bottom. That's not water, that's sweet nectar. So the bees and birds will love the flannel bush. So now we're going to look at some different lupine. These ones are small. These are called bicolor, meaning two colors, and this is why. So here we have the little lupine flowers, much smaller than the first one we looked at. So if you look at this one, it's purple. And if you look at the one right below it, these are more of a red color. And this is how it tells the bees that they've already been pollinated. Don't have to come to me. Come to this guy up here. He still needs to be pollinated. And then if we look carefully over here, we can see that it starts to make the little seed pods. Same looking fuzzy seed pods as the other one, just smaller. Those are the Bicolor Lupine, 2 colors, purple and red after it's pollinated. So here I have a felt board of a sunflower. We're back in the classroom because it was getting a little hot outside. And the sunflower has the center where all the seeds are, and then it has the petals on the edges. Then it has the green stem, and then it has the leaves. And on the bottom, under the ground, are the roots. The roots are usually white. Sometimes they're different colors, but they're typically white. So now we're going to take it apart. We're going to talk about the sunflower for a second because it's fun. So as the sunflower gets bigger and riper, and all the pollinators, all the bees have already come and pollinated. Actually, a sunflower is a lot of flowers. Even though it looks like one, it's a combination of so many, and every little flower is inside, and when the bee touches it, they pollinate all the little flowers that are here in the center. Once they're all pollinated, then the flower starts to die. It starts to lose its petals, they turn brown and fall off, and the seeds are forming inside the seed head here, and then the leaves start to become a little brown, and the stem becomes a little weak, and the whole thing starts to kind of fall back to the ground. Well, what happens to those seeds as they fall? Well, they can be planted. All the leaves fall off, and then the roots will eventually be absorbed into the soil. That doesn't grow back from the roots. It only grows back from the seeds. So here's a seed here and a seed here. And the next year, let's say the ground starts here, the next year, the roots will start from that seed, and then it'll start to come up with a sprout, and the sprout will grow. As the sprout grows, then it will open up for a couple of leaves, and as it gets taller, those first 2 leaves grow up a little bit higher. And then the next 2 leaves will come out a little bit higher. And then the bud will start to form. So this part just looks like a little bud starting to form, and it starts to open up. And as it opens up, all the petals start opening around it. And as they open around it, inside there's all those little tiny flowers that make up one big flower. And then the bees will come, they'll pollinate all those little flowers inside, and then we'll end up with this great big sunflower. And then as the sunflower is in the sun, growing and growing, it'll produce all of its seeds, and they'll get riper and riper, ready to grow. And then the petals will fall off, the sunflower will die back to the ground, and it will start all over again. So I brought some flowers from home because I knew we didn't have some of these here in the garden. So this is a fun one. It's getting a little bit wilted because I cut them a while back. Let me see if I can get it to open for you. This one is in the poppy family, and it's called a bush poppy. See all these little guys right here? These are what make the pollen. And the one that's right in the middle, there's something right in the middle. Do you see that hard one in the middle? That's where the seed pod starts. That one right in the middle that looks a little bit green is called a pistil. And these ones on the outside are called stamen. And this is what the bud looks like before it opens. But it's a little bit wilted right now because I cut it a bit ago. Then after it gets pollinated, this part will grow. Let me show you one where it's getting bigger. Look at that. It's getting bigger. The seed pod is starting to form. Some of the petals are starting to fall off, and it will get even bigger. And when it gets even bigger, it'll grow to something like this and maybe even a bigger yet. And when it gets done like this, then it will start to turn brown and the seeds inside will become brown. And when it's ready, and it's not ready yet, but I'm going to open it for you, it'll pop open and shoot those seeds out to try to grow new plants. They're all green now, so they're not ready to grow. They have to turn brown, and the outside turns brown, and then it pops and they shoot out, which is really fun. There's another flower that I grow at home, and I just like the name. It's called the sticky monkey flower, and I think somebody thought this looked like a monkey face. Can you look at that flower? Can you see the two ears and maybe kind of use your imagination and make it a monkey face? That's interesting. And inside you can see the little bits of pollen. See, it has white pollen. Can you see that white pollen in there? There you go. You got to get in there and get that pollen. You have to go deep in there if you're a bee if you want to get the nectar. And there's so much nectar, it's actually kind of sticky on my fingers. And now I brought another flower, and this one is not one of our native flowers, but this is one that's from my garden. And I brought it because it's so big, and you can really see all the parts of the flower easily since it's so large. So let me show you what we got. Remember, these on the outside are called the petals, right? These are the petals. And do you see those little pollen? Look at that. Look at all that pollen that can be taken from this flower. This one's called an amarilla. And then if we look inside, the middle part is not green. On this one, it's white, but it looks different. See, this part looks different. This is the pistil. And this is what will end up growing the seeds. So lots and lots of pollen to see in this flower. Now I don't have another flower nearby, so I can't pollinate it right now. So we have a good story today, and it's about growing a seed. It's about growing a poppy, and it's called Avas Poppy. Now, the kind of poppy she has is a red one. The kind of poppies we have here are yellow and orange, or all yellow. We even have a white poppy, but they're not blooming yet. So here's a poppy, and you can see here's the bud and the flower, and then the seeds are being made, and then it's all dry. Let's see what happens. Ava's poppy. Every morning, Ava crossed the field in front of her house. Look what she sees. There's the red poppy. One day, she found a poppy. "You're very beautiful," said Ava. "Please, can I be your friend?" You think you could be a friend with a plant? I'm a friend with lots of plants at home. Ava visited her flower every day, and every day she found it right away. It stood out in the field, a lovely shiny red. Its petals were very soft, and sometimes they moved gently in the breeze. Together, Ava and her poppy would look up at the sky. Ava was always there for her friend. She protected it from a cold wind. She gave it water when the earth was dry. And she put up her umbrella when it rained too hard. That is a good friend. Ava looked after her friend with tender, loving care. But then the flower began to lose its petals. Ava was sad. Only the round capsule was still shiny, fresh, and green. What do you think might be inside here? But soon that too became brown and dry. Ava dug a hole and laid the capsule inside and covered it with earth. "Goodbye, dear poppy," whispered Ava. She was burying her friend. Ava made a circle of stones to remind her where her flower once stood. When winter came, Ava often thought of her friend. "The snow would certainly have been too cold for my flower," she said. In the spring, Ava went back to her stone circle, and there she made a wonderful discovery. In the center of the circle, a tender little plant was reaching up toward the sky. Every time you plant the seed, you can have a new seed come in next time. And there it starts as a sprout. It's a little bit bigger, and it sends up the bud, and the bud opens, and then it makes the capsule, and the capsule dries, and it falls to the ground and makes more plants. That's the story of Avas Poppy. So now we're going to head out into the preserve, and we're going to find some poppies and some other things. But before we go out, we're going to look at Mrs. Stell's mural. She's painted so many beautiful flowers on them. Let's see if we can find some poppies. We're going to turn back here, and she's still working. She's still painting. And the ones that are right above her head are the Matilaha poppies, the big ones. Those poppies we call the fried egg flower. They're not quite blooming in the preserve yet, but they're really, really beautiful. Let's go take a closer look. So this is Mrs. Stell, and she's the wonderful artist that had been painting the wall right behind us. Let's see what she's working on. She's working on the Matilaha poppy and the bees inside. Look at how pretty the paintings are coming out. And since I can't show you the real one today, we'll see the one that looks just like the real one. Thank you, Estelle. That's really helpful. We love the wall. So we came out into the preserve and we're looking at some poppies. And again, these are the coastal dune poppies with the yellow on the outside and the orange in the middle. And we're stopping here because not only do the bees love the poppies, so do these little beetles. These are called soft shell flower beetles, and they're in there eating pollen like crazy. And they can fly. Beetles can fly. Look at them. They're enjoying the pollen from the poppy. So we walked over to this plant, and this one has a flower on it, the little yellow flowers that they call a fiddle neck. Now, if you think of something called a fiddle, like a violin, the top of the violin has this little curl. And if you look carefully at the flowers themselves, you look way inside, you can see the little tiny bits of pollen. And that's what the bees are after. This one is called a fiddle neck because of the shape of the whole part of the flower. Let's go look for some more. So we're walking along and we saw these white flowers. These white flowers are in a bush called a rattlepod. And this is the host plant for the Palos Verdes blue butterfly, which is a small little blue butterfly. Maybe they would lay their eggs and the caterpillar could eat this plant. Now we call it a rattlepod because it makes pods, these little seed pods. And you can see they start out quite small and they're filled with air, and they'll get bigger and they'll turn brown and crunchy, and then they pop. And when you pop them open, there's seeds inside. But right now the seeds are itty bitty because it hasn't had a chance to grow yet. Pop, they pop open. So when they get nice and brown and crunchy, then you can get a handful of seeds. Oh, here's one that's already brown. It fell off, but it looks like it didn't open yet. Oh, maybe it did open. It's open here. The seeds must have already come out. Let's see. Oh no, there's still some in there. There's some little seeds inside. These are the seeds of the rattlepod. So here we are at the live oak tree, and we've talked about the oak tree. Think for a moment, what does the oak tree make? Acorns. And in order to make acorns, it has to start by a flower because the acorn is the seed. So it needs to have a flower in order to make an acorn. So if I walk in here, we can see how teeny tiny the little flowers are that make the acorns. Sometimes we forget to look at the trees because the trees do bloom. Let's find some more blooming trees. So here is our California sycamore tree. This is a big tree, and this tree has really fuzzy leaves. They're very soft. Let's look at the flowers. So the flower starts out as a little bud, and you can see it hasn't really opened yet, but then when it opens, they look like this. And when you touch them, they're loaded with pollen. Do you see that powdery stuff on my hands? That's the pollen. And then once they get pollinated, they'll form seed pods. And the seed pods look different. Seed pods hang on the plant Like these ones are smaller and they'll get bigger and they get bigger as we look up. Let me grab some and I'll show you what happens. So once you're down here and they're totally ripe, then they break open like parachutes. Every parachute has a seed, and then they can blow in the wind and maybe grow new plants. This is the California sycamore tree. They have flowers too, but they're different. They're interesting. So here we have one of our black willows, and look at the flowers. They're so nice. And if you look carefully, there's a lot of bees that are collecting the pollen from the flowers. Here's a honeybee back here. I don't want to get too close or she might fly off. So all of these willows will turn into that fluffy seed that we saw one time in our video. First they've got to have the flower, then they get pollinated, and then they make seeds. And we remember this tree. This is the tree that has the roots that float on the water. Here's some of those roots. And this year, I don't think the tree's going to need those floating roots because there's no water this far into the preserve. We had a very dry year. This is the black willow. Let's look back 5 months ago. This willow tree has a lot of seeds, and these are all really fluffy. And if Miss Susan watches me, we'll make more fluff. Come off. Here we have the mule fat bush. And this one has leaves that are similar to the willow, but the flowers are different. See those little tiny flowers? These are the flowers. And then this is after the seeds have developed and blown off. And here's some of the seeds. And they have parachutes. And right behind it, you can see the willow. And remember, the willow tree had the long kind of flower stem, and these have little flowers. So even though the leaves look similar, you can tell the plants apart. So it's fun to come to the preserve in the spring and find everything is blooming. So glad you could join us today. Bye.